Hello everyone. So today there is a rather big announcement, and that is I'm going to have a new real-time planetary system up on the Patreon. It will be on the $10. The full version will be on the $10 tier. I'm thinking about putting up a bit of a stunted version on the $5 tier. Um, I am still considering that. I'm not sure if I want to do that or not, but full one on the $10 tier. And let's get into it. You have just seen a couple shots. Um, I am not lying when I say that renders in 4 to 5 seconds of frame consistently. Um, you can see this is how fast it renders. After like 1 or 2 seconds, it's pretty much noiseless here. And I'm recording, so that's slowing it down a bit. But let's go through attributes. Well, yeah, and that'll be sort of a technical demonstration of what this thing can do. And yeah, I think let's get into it. I'm going to try and go quickly. So let's speed run this, because this is going to be boring. And there are a couple of ones of these. So each of these, no groups, controls a property of this. So the first one, planet center, this is the center of the planet relative to the origin and scale. So if we set this to -1 on the Z8 value, we can see we're pushing it down 1. Boom. If we put 1, we can see we're pushing it up 1. Right, that's the center of the planet. Give it a second to update. Yay. I keep it at 0 sometimes. -1 is useful if you want to use this as an atmosphere material and you don't want to have to shift your stuff up. Light direction, also pretty self-explanatory. This controls where the light's coming from. If you make it point down more, I mean it's going to point down more. And useful to note, the shadows update dynamically from the rings, which is kind of cool. So, there you go. Planet rotation. This is the general rotation of the entire system. So if I were to set this like 52, look at this. It's rotated 52 degrees around some axis. And this is, I mean, you can control this, you can do whatever you want with it. But that is that. I'm going to reset this. Now it's relative to the planet center as well, so keep that in mind. Planet radius is the radius in world coordinates that the planet is. This planet, I should mention, it's all through the world shader. This is not a physical object. You can see that if we turn on the wire, the floor, right? You can literally see that it's just behind everything. It just looks like it isn't, which makes this useful for HDRIs. Not useful for some other stuff though, but planets are generally used as backgrounds, not physical things you're interacting with. So this is the basically how slow the camera would move through it. It's just multiplying the vector input, the vector position by, or the camera position, or it's dividing it by this number. So that's why planet center, that's relative to the scale as well. So if I change this to like 1, it'll be the same system, just scaled down a bit. Boom. But I like to keep this at about 1000. Doesn't really matter, but it's helpful. Next, light color. This is the color that's being emitted by the sun. So if I want this to be reddish, like there was a shot in the little trailer thing I put that was reddish, that's basically just this. Yeah. Sun disk radius. You can see the sun disk over there, right up there. If you set this to 2, it's big. If you set this to 0.1, it's tiny. light samples. This is a bit more technical. This is how many light samples you're computing. I only added an attribute for this because I think some people might want to speed it up a little bit if they got poorer machines. That being said, I don't think it's good to really mess with this too much, especially don't go higher than 6. It even says it on the note. Actually, it won't add any computation if you go higher than 6. It'll get you a bit more detail in the clouds, but it won't compute the full light path trajectory. So it'll be less realistic, but more detailed. Mess with that if you want. It's not going to really hurt anything. I don't really care. Atmosphere thickness. So we're done with the general attributes. Let's go into the atmosphere attributes. Relatively self-explanatory. This controls how thick the atmosphere is relative to the planet radius. You can see if we have it at 0.1, it's big. If we have it at 1, it's really big. I keep this quite small generally. And by the way, there will be issues with intersecting with the rings if you put this too big. But yeah, that's for you to mess with. Atmosphere density. This controls how dense the atmosphere is. This is useful for some stuff, so don't mess with it, please. Just use this value node. I'll actually label it better for you. There you go. That way you guys do not mess with the other stuff, because the other stuff is important, even though it doesn't look especially pretty. And I should take this time to mention, and by the way, you can see the effects right there. This is first and foremost an atmosphere system, so it does work and is designed to work from inside the atmosphere, and therefore it has stuff like me scattering and everything, and I will show you all this later. And the rings look pretty awesome from inside the atmosphere. So yeah, atmosphere absorption amount. This is partnered with atmosphere absorption color. These are relatively self-explanatory. They control how much and what color of absorption there is that's applied in each light sample, each light sample calculation. If you want this to have more absorption and you want it to absorb just a little bit more light each time, you can do that, and you can see the effects. You can make it absorb a lot of red light or a lot of blue light and make it more red. Whatever you want to do. I generally keep this low. It operates pretty good when it's low, but this is there to suit your planetary needs. Me strength. This is what I was talking about with the being used as an atmosphere system first and foremost. So you can see this is me scattering. This is the scattering that's by particles that are bigger than the wavelength of light that the atmosphere, or that's coming down. So these are like dust particles and stuff. I think that's a good explanation for it. I actually don't know. But it's there, and it's relevant, and it's an attribute here. So if you want to turn this off, you can set it to 0. And you can see there's no me scattering anywhere. But I like to have this at 1 because I think it looks good, and I spent some time on this, and I like to show off my work. Me radius, this falls into the same tier. If you want to have this be very narrow, just around the sun, you can do that by lowering the radius. I like to have this at about 0.025. I think that's a good split. Up to you. Cloud density. This is the density of the clouds themselves. It's pretty self-explanatory. If you want to turn clouds off, I'm not going to do that because the texture is large and it takes a while to load back again. You can do that by setting this to 0. And that'll save you some computational time, and it makes the thing run basically perfectly real time. So you can mess around with that. Atmosphere irradiance, fancy way for saying how bright the atmosphere is. So if you want to have this at 0.1 and have it super dark, you can do that. It's not going to affect the absorption or the light scattering amount, but it will be less emissive. So I'm going to keep this at 2. I like that value. And let's move on. Atmosphere color, pretty self-explanatory. This is the basic color of the atmosphere. And you can see that when I change it, the light scattering computations work along with it. So if I want to have a Martian atmosphere, and Mars atmosphere is red, so it scatters red light, and therefore you get bluish sort of tinting at the edges. You can see that we've got that sort of tinting. It's pretty cool. So it's physically accurate, and I like it. If you want to set to like gray, you can do that. I think this also gives a pretty cool look. Kind of interesting. Anyway, I like to keep this sort of nice earth hue, nice earthy hue. But yeah, atmosphere, we already covered that. Atmosphere shadow bias. This is what I use for gas giants, because gas giants have odd atmospheres and that they're super thin, but they are very, like their atmosphere, not like their clouds and stuff. But they tend to taper off very gradually, so you can see this just helps along with that, and this is basically the degree at which it does. I'd recommend playing with this only if you need it for gas plants, because it can tend to be a little bit weird. Like it'll work, but it's not great. Night light amount. This, you can see the backside, not perfectly dark. This is how much that is, so if I want to give it more, let's say I have in the background here, I put an HDRI or something that has a planet on it. You can do that. I want to make it so that you can control the tinting of this as well. That'll be in the future. Ground irradiance. This is the how much the ground emits. So if I change this to 10, you can see a lot more ground. I keep it 2 or 3. That works. That seems to work well. Ground redshift intensity. This is how much the atmosphere tints the ground. So if I change this to 1, you can see that there's less of it. Let's give it some time to update. It's only barely prevalent around the edges, right? And you can see it right there. All right, it's there. Cloud irradiance. This is the irradiance of the clouds relative to the atmosphere. So if I want this to be 10, the clouds will be a lot brighter than the atmosphere. But I keep that around 2. This is more technical. Monte Carlo is a progressive rendering technique, basically, and it basically means I add some noise to each sample to vary them, and I let that noise resolve after a couple samples. That's what Cycles does. That's what Eevee sort of does. This is a bit odd to play with, but if you turn it off, you can get some interesting effects, or just put it down like 0.01 or 0.1 or 0.2. With the clouds especially, I think it looks interesting. And in some of the trailer shots, I actually have this hovering at around 0.1 or 0.2, simply because it sort of gives the clouds a bit more detail, because they look less fuzzy. It makes them look flatter but more detailed, if you can kind of understand that. Cloud ground absorption. This is actually not currently working very well, so it's implemented, but it's not fully there yet. Let me get this. Where's ground radiance? It seems awfully low. I don't know. Cloud ground absorption. This will basically just mean this is how much the clouds block out the ground below them. By the way, observe the beautiful parallax that is something you get with this. And it works well with them. It meshes in with the clouds and stuff. It's really quite nice, I think. And this is coincidentally the next property we're going to talk about. This is the parallax strength. So you can mess with this. You can see you can have more, you can have less. I think it's kind of cool how the parallax kind of makes the clouds blend in with the mountains. And well, I mean, you can go crazy with this, but this is the max I really ever do. But yeah, okay, onto rings. Let's set this planet center back. Oh, missed it. There we go. Rings. Rings density. This is how dense the rings are. This is basically how dense they scatter the light. So if you want to turn rings off, by the way, again, you could put it at 0. And you can see if I set this to like 100, you'll see what happens. It'll be very dark. I have a weird thing where my mouse keeps double clicking for some reason. I don't know. Rings absorption color, you can see this is reddish now, and it's casting a red hue. If you want this to be black or like colorless, you can do that. I like it like this. Actually, that looks kind of cool, doesn't it? Give it a second to update. Yeah, it looks kind of interesting, kind of neat. We'll keep that. We'll keep that. Rings noise mod. This is basically the seed for the noise in the rings. Ring inner radius, the inner radius of the rings. Ring outer radius, the outer radius of the rings. I mean, it's basically, again, pretty self-explanatory. Ring roughness. The roughness of the scattering on the ring. So if you change this to like 0.1, it's a lot more shimmery. Oh, not shimmery, but it's like a lot more concentrated shimmeriness. Rings atmosphere. What's this one? Oh, this is not currently implemented. Well, it actually kind of is. You can kind of see it right there. But it is not yet done, so don't pay attention to that. And then these are all the textures, and these you can probably figure out yourself. One thing that's useful to note about these, this is already barking at the node limit of Blender. Blender has a node limit in Cycles, so this works, but barely. So procedural textures and complex procedural textures aren't going to work that well. Just beware. I'd highly recommend you only use image textures that are either equal, and box mapping won't work, unfortunately. So if you want full spherical textureness, use box mapping is planned in for the future, but considering this is all in the world shader nodes and not a physical object, it doesn't have physical normals that box shading would work with, or box mapping would work with. So that would be in the future that I would implement that, but that is a plan. Keep that. You can definitely try to implement it by yourself. It's not that hard. So keep that in mind. I'll provide the textures I'm using for this one as well. And this should be up later today, by the way. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. You can see we're in the world nodes. I want to give you a tour of the atmosphere functionality of this, because that wasn't really demonstrated very well, I don't think. So yeah, I'm gonna turn off the clouds. Actually, I'm gonna keep the clouds on at first because this is kind of cool what you can do with it. So let's put it into atmosphere mode. So the clouds, everything works from the ground as well as in space. It's not super detailed, but it is there. And you can see sort of like there's some detail in the clouds, and I think that's kind of cool. Volumetric shadows. Definitely like fairly realistic, if anything. Definitely not super detailed, but it's there. I'm trying to find. Yeah. So yeah, there are. The rings. They look. So part of the reason why I wanted to add rings is because I was working on some shots that I needed rings in the atmosphere for, and I didn't want to have to deal with anything because I'm lazy. So there those are. I'm going to turn off clouds as well because I don't need them. And you can see it's immediately a bit faster. But you can see this is what it looks like when the with the rings casting shadows on the atmosphere. Really neat, really cool effect. You can fly through these. You can see all the beautiful layers of scattering. And if I go into the night, you can still see rings and stuff. I think this is a fully capable atmosphere system, in addition to being like just a planet system. So yeah, I mean, you'll be the judge of that, definitely. But if I could toot my own horn, I think this is a very powerful system, and I'm very proud of it. So there we go, folks. That is the complete tour of this, and you shall see new updates that will come out periodically, whether they be for bug fixes, new features. Like there's some still, like this is still technically beta, right? There's some stuff that doesn't work entirely yet. But yeah. Have a good one, guys, and I will see you sometime soon. As I said, I want to end with this. So here's a little self-promotional stuff. Pay attention to it or don't. As I said before, this is on Patreon. This might be up on GUMROAD sometime, maybe Blender Market. That'll be after I got all the bug fixes ironed out. As I said, this will be on the $10 version. Still debating whether or not to put something on the $5 version. If I do, it won't be as functional. This is the full version as of right now. We got a Discord server. We're nearing 500 members, which is crazy. Don't forget to share this around. I don't like doing this, but because it's so cliche, but like I want people to see my stuff. I want to hopefully get a little bit of money out of it, and I want to basically just provide resources for people. And I think that this is definitely, I've poured my heart and soul into this over the course of a few weeks. So if it can reach some broad audience, I mean, I will thank you all dearly for that. So with that being said, I'm going to leave you guys, and I'm going to stop my shameless little plugging about And yeah, real-time planets, folks.